Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here on this July 1st, 2021. I am Nick Kinoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am really excited to be here today. Before we get underway, I just want to thank our patron sponsors, ABS Quality Evaluations, an ABS Group company, and Onuma System. You can find more out about these organizations at the links you see here below, abs-qe.com, abs-group.com, and onuma/-bim.com. And now a word about our organizational members. Again, just without these sponsorships, we could not do programming like this. So we are very grateful for Lifecycle Engineering, University Health, Uberlytics, Grant Thornton, the Andrew James Advisory Group, AIM for AMS, Asset Management Lab, Mentor APM, My Property ID Registry, and Strategies Insight. And last, just before we get underway, I want to say next week, at this time, Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we will have Robert Kaler here speaking with us. So please join us for that. And then I'll pass it back to Mike Ordinero. And Mike, you were going to say a word about our sponsor for the month, LCE.
Yes, I'm Mike Bordenau, Communications Director for the Asset Leadership Network, and our new member at LCE, Lifecycle Engineering, is the sponsor for the month. And they started off very interestingly 40 plus years ago doing naval work for the Navy, the nuclear submarines. They've grown their portfolio largely in the federal government, but is expanding it outside the federal government to utilities, electric utilities, water and wastewater, and other private sector entities. And they're expanding from the operations, maintenance, and life cycle aspects to consulting for ISO 55000. That's one of the reasons why they joined us. So we're very happy that they joined us, and we're very happy that Carrie Heishman has joined us. Hi, Carrie, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Sure. So we like to start with, how did you get here in your asset management journey? So what's your story? How did you get where you're at now?
Sure. I guess, when I was thinking back to graduating college, I probably didn't think I'd have a career in asset management, but have been really fortunate along the way to work with so many brilliant people kind of over the years, and to have both clients and colleagues that have continued to push for improvements in asset management in their respective domains. So early on in my career, I started in environmental policy consulting at Booz Allen, mostly supporting EPA and the Department of Transportation, and then had an opportunity to work on and then lead an initiative in the Army to start up their natural infrastructure program. So I know a lot of probably the viewers are very familiar with built infrastructure, but natural infrastructure in terms of, like, at least Department of Defense terms, really assesses the capabilities and capacities, or maybe conversely the limitations of land, training areas and ranges, airspace, water and energy. And, as the program evolved a little bit, the water energy aspects really kind of focus more on energy security, resiliency and redundancy. So from there, I had the privilege of taking on more of a program management role that included, the natural infrastructure program I just talked about, in addition to the assessment of the built infrastructure for the Army, which is about 400,000 assets or so. And then the assessment of about 80 plus of the services that are provided to soldiers and their families. So you think of installations as like little cities, they're tracking the cost and the quality of, housing, public works, logistics, mission support, environment, family programs, all kinds of different services that they want to make sure that they're delivering the best quality services and keeping track of the requirements of what it costs. And so that kind of the installation portfolio takes up about 15% of the Army's budget. So I kind of was involved in that program for over a decade, and then a little over a year ago met Jack Dempsey at Definitive Logic, and was immediately interested in DL's approach to asset management, which is really grounded in ISO 55000 principles. So since then, coming on board, I'm tackling some of the most interesting kind of asset management challenges for some of our clients.
So what did you get your master's degree in?
It was from Johns Hopkins University, and it was actually in government. And the thesis for that was energy security, water security. So at the time, I get kind of aligned with the National Infrastructure Program and kind of launching that. It was in government.
Excellent.
And global security. Mm-hmm.
Key part of asset management is risk reduction. So, and then Jim just said, never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But while you were at Booz Allen, did you run into Will Rowe?
Yes, I know Will. Yep.
Spectacular man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, good. I'm glad you had a chance to work with him.
Small world.
Yeah. And then what are you doing at Definitive Logic now? So
I'd say that the main projects are supporting our DoD clients, and the initiatives that we're working on kind of fall into 3 different areas. So the first one would probably be like the change management aspect, or kind of human element of establishing strategic asset management plans, setting up kind of governance and frameworks, those kinds of things. The kind of second ones would be more like improving processes, and of course, improving those processes, we're supporting that with like technology. So automating, we're kind of in the final throes of automating a particular project that previously was kind of spreadsheet based. So there was a lot of updating different assessments for the Mission Dependency Index. And, as they get the change request, and there's a lot of justification, some of the things that kind of go along with that. So really excited to be kind of a part of, transforming that process and making that, that process easier on the installations.
Excellent. So what are the things that you're finding through your career that government clients need to know about asset management?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the first thing is, and I think that this comes from, kind of starts with the strategic asset management plan. So having a vision or like a roadmap, I think is probably maybe the first step in that. So I think a lot of our clients already have overarching and very good overarching goals and objectives, and then it's kind of how do you bring those into make them asset management objective focused, and to kind of get, there's a few steps, and kind of a first part of that, what we found is that there's like an assessment process that takes place. So you kind of see where you are now, right? So you kind of figure out where you are, how mature a lot of your parts of your system are, and then you can kind of start to say, okay, we want to be here in the future, so how do we get there? So I think that the roadmap's probably at a very kind of macro level, a lot of what the government clients are looking for.
Mm-hmm. So it's not really said, but so much about asset management is behavior management.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that in the government, the leaders are committed to improvement and don't take it personally that maybe one area is not as good as another, and are willing to make the change management actions happen. Do you find that there's that kind of leadership in the government?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that at least in my experience, we've worked with all of our clients have been very engaged, and like you said, they're trying to kind of push the envelope and kind of push ahead on a lot of these objectives and lean forward and improving their organizations. And it kind of runs the gamut, from like data quality to, like I mentioned, the strategic asset management plans to just process improvement, integration of systems. So it kind of runs the gamut. But I think across the board, we're finding their leadership is very engaged and know where they have where they need to head.
Excellent. So one of the reasons why Jack Dempsey recommended you as a guest is your involvement in the ISO 55001 revision. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what your title is, what your role is, and how you're helping with that activity.
Oh, sure thing. So the actual revisions themselves is just kicked off, and the kind of the first look from the 55,001 perspective is they've kind of divided them up in various themes. So one of the themes is the strategic asset management plan, which I'm going to head up the looking at, like, what's needed to kind of relook some of this. So what's working well, what needs to stay, and also kind of, since it was first written, things have evolved. The asset management, I guess, domain is grown tremendously. So I'm sure there's some things that that kind of missed along the way. So we're working together as a group to figure out where those connections are in 55,001 that need to be updated in regards to the SAMP. And I also have to say that working kind of, I was very new to ISO 55,000. Started like last year, kind of working with some of in the working groups, and talk about a lot of brain power and a lot like tremendous expertise in various industries kind of working towards this revision. So really excited, as we kind of kick this off, what this revision is going to mean in terms of, what the SAMP's going to look like in the future.
So you're the head of the U.S. Technical Advisory Group that's section that's looking at the strategic asset management plan.
It actually be the ISO, like the actual TC 251, so the world group.
Okay, international. All right, thanks for that.
No problem. It's under working group 6 is where that falls, which is the revision of that 55,001.
Yes. So here's a note to my ALN colleagues. I think we need to outline that process and have an actual chart on our website. But anyway, back to you, Carrie. The brain power you talked about is something that's very interesting to me. Jim Dieter said that helping write the first ISO document on asset management was like getting a master's degree. And he said this process is like getting a doctorate. Mm-hmm. So everybody's really looked at it and know what they want to sharpen. Is there anything coming through yet in terms of what people think is good and what they want to improve?
I think since we just started, it's probably too early to tell in terms of the SAMP itself, but I know that there's a lot of good discussions going on. Like you said, there's industry experts kind of across the board that are looking at this and already have. You talked about kind of the U.S. tech, but the different countries kind of coming to the table are already looking at some of the revisions in a very strategic way. So excited to see kind of where that ends up. I think we'll start with the foundational, at least for, speaking for the SAMP working group. You start with those foundational principles of what's working well, what's the essence of of the SAMP, and then also what might have been missed, or what do we need to add to supplement some of the language in 55,001. So, but no clear themes emerging yet. So
okay, so then can you tell us a little bit more about your exposure to the ISO 55,000, 55,001, and 2? What did you do to get your understanding of it?
Yeah, so when I first joined DL, Jack came to me and was like, hey, there's this group, called ISO 55,000, and you really should join to kind of broaden your horizons on asset management. And I was like, yeah, like that sounds good. Another industry group I need to join, right? But as soon as you kind of got into, and the time it was working group 4, which was the product improvement, and immediately worked in one of their ad hoc working groups on data decision making models and kind of looking at some of those things. Immediately, that you're, like you said, you're kind of getting a doctorate in asset management, and I think both in working group 4 and working group 6 and kind of across the board, and in my experience with ISO 55,000 is that those topics that are being discussed in each of these working groups and these meetings, you can immediately kind of bring back to our client work and start to see, this is how some of these things are pieced together, and you can start to kind of apply these almost immediately, because the same everyone's kind of tackling a lot of common issues across the board in asset management. So I think these are, there's a lot of like transferability across a lot of common issues that they're tackling. So I think that's kind of my experience with kind of getting into ISO, was just attending the working groups, sitting in on the sessions, showing up, and then when the opportunity came up as they were doing the revisions of 55,001, offered to lead the SAMP theme.
Excellent. So this is one of those entities, nonprofit, volunteer activities that is actually giving you direct impact on your day-to-day job.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Jim Dieter is curious, what do you think about the relationship between, right, and there's another question too, so I'm going to make this a little broader. So the strategic asset management plan starts the whole ball rolling. Mm-hmm. How do you think that influences the asset management plans? What do you see as the relationship between the strategy and more the tactical approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it ends up being probably when it plays out, kind of organizations have to kind of define that relationship a little bit, but kind of broadly speaking, your strategic asset management plans are going to set those kind of high level organizational asset management goals. Mm-hmm. And then your asset management plans are really going to look at like specific, and you can divide them in to geographies. You could divide them into like different portfolios. You could have like housing, or you could have like wastewater. You could divide it in different ways, those asset management plans. But you take something like optimize your like utilization as like maybe like a strategic asset management plan objective, and then with each of those portfolios, those asset management plans, you can find ways to implement that overarching goal. So there's definitely a definite connection between like the overarching strategy and and how those objectives are kind of implemented through those asset management plans.
Okay, thank you. So then this one's a little tougher question because it's not happening yet, but since the strategic asset management plan is so critical mm-hmm. to the document, ISO 55001 document, how are you planning to interact with the other working groups to maintain the relationship between the SAMP and what they're doing? Are there any plans for that kind of intergroup discussions?
Yeah, the way the ISO path works is that once we kind of get our like collective kind of insert our own working group kind of collectively, then we'll kind of broaden it out to our entire working group, and then there's a chance to like vet those things kind of across the various working groups then too. So it kind of grows as you kind of go through the process. There's definitely some opportunities to like ensure, because the SAMP is so important, and definitely there's like mentioned risk before. There's these things that kind of cross 55,000, 55,001 that make sure that they need to make sure that they're coordinated in the most when it makes sense.
Yes. So my first exposure to 55,000, all of them, is I read them word for word. And I was like, oh man, it was brutal. But it was actually really good to get familiar. And I charted it out and I saw how much replication there was. Do you think some of that replication will come out while still keeping the interconnectedness of the different sections?
I think so. I think that there's been a lot, like you said, that people have had time to review it, and then just like us, take it and kind of start to implement it, in like real life like organizations, and see how these things like are actually operating. So you've had some years to kind of take a look at that. So I definitely think people are going to come back to the table and make some revisions to make sure that it's concise as possible while still maintaining the connections between the two.
Mm-hmm. And then do you have any personal ideas that you can share with us that you're bringing to the leadership of this group about the SAMP? Anything that you're trying to emphasize?
Yeah, I would definitely say that in terms of like the SAMP itself, and for those that aren't as familiar with the, what the SAMP may include, it definitely includes like your kind of overview of your organization, the link from your organizational goals to your asset management goals, some information about your portfolio. So it kind of goes through steps through many different things, but I think most importantly provides a framework for, the kind of the roles and responsibilities, how decisions get made, what I'd call like a governance structure, essentially. So I think that's going to be something that I would recommend taking a look at and making sure that, from a leadership perspective, and if a SAMP is done correctly, it really integrates all these kind of siloed activities in a way that really makes, organization hum and kind of march towards like their kind of together and into their common goals.
Yeah, there's a question about whether there is a group looking at section 4.2, which is the stakeholders, involving all the relevant stakeholders. And I know that Cecilia Moad, who asked the question, has a feeling, an instinct that once you expand the stakeholder involvement, then that's going to change a lot of the objectives and the mission and the whole thinking that drives the SAMP.
Mm-hmm.
In your own personal work, have you been able to help expand what is considered the relevant stakeholders and seen improvement occur because you get voice from places that typically weren't being represented?
I think so. I think there's also even within like the kind of what we can traditionally consider like the asset management realm. Some of these activities don't necessarily talk to each other, as often or as well as we like to them. So I think there's a first step kind of internally to like, what we traditionally call traditional asset management activities. There's definitely some opportunities there to integrate those activities, but definitely to your question about the external ones, and one that comes to mind immediately is like the financial, like resource managers, and as soon as they start to kind of weigh in, it does provide some different, because they look at through a different lens. So, but I think overall that ultimately improves the end objectives, because financial and your resourcing, go hand in hand, and you have to they need to be talking like at least a similar language in order to kind of get the best requirement.
We've been finding that chief financial officers are driving asset management improvements. The power of the purse really gets people's attention. And do you think it would be beneficial for us to approach the federal CFO committee council? I forget what the official name is, but there is a committee of all the agency CFOs and inform them about ISO 55000?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely one of the areas, because you said that each of and it's talking for like the DoD realm, each of the services have like their own kind of speak in terms of like how they look at asset management. Then the financial sector, or the resource managers kind of have their own, or CFOs kind of have their own look at, but definitely I think that's beneficial for them to get more involved in asset management, and because ultimately they're the ones that are divvying out kind of relaying the requirements, and then ultimately kind of on the execution side as well.
Yeah. Okay. Now this is me revealing my admiration. How do you deal with the Department of Defense? It is so huge. There are so many different pushes and pulls. There's so many important factors to have to weigh in. And it seems like it's almost impossible to think about improving the Department of Defense or any of its agencies. What are you finding is working, and how is it happening?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good question. I'll say, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but like the clients, the government leaders are phenomenal. Like I said, they're very engaged, and they're looking to push, they're continually pushing, their organization, their leadership kind of forward, and seeing that like some integration has to happen, modernization has to happen, and all these different things. But organizations, especially large organizations, don't change overnight. So kind of as we look at like kind of improvement, I know personally from my measure, kind of looking at like systems and those kind of things, you just kind of look back and say, okay, are we moving the needle like a little bit, forward and making progress? And that's where it really helps to have that roadmap or that envision. So kind of like, okay, we tackled like this audit or this monitoring, or like we now have better data quality, or we've improved readiness by like this percent, those kind of things, right? So you can kind of look at year after year, how you're kind of moving that forward. And like I said, all the government leaders that we interact with have been phenomenal in terms of really responsive to looking at improving asset management, because ultimately, as I said, it either improves readiness, it improves their data quality or accuracy, and ideally, in a lot of cases, I know at least from the DL perspective, we're looking at reducing the burden on particularly the installations, but even the government leadership, they're multi-hatted in a lot of ways. So usually, like developing a SAMP isn't going to be their only like role and responsibility. So but yeah, so I think that's kind of looking at progress and just looking at measuring over time. And it's not going to be like the commercial sector where you see you might not see like an overnight change in like 6 months or something, or 3 months. So.
Right. So Russell Weniger from the U.S. Air Force has blessed he's attending, and it's quite an honor. He is the person who is in charge of doing the asset management improvements at the Air Force and driving that. And he made a comment when we were talking about the CFOs, that the CFO is truly the risk manager of the organizations, because they have to get people's attention by saying, you can't get the money, or we'll give you the money to do more of this. It's really the main pass-through. Do you see that also?
Absolutely. Yeah, Mr. Weniger is definitely one of those thought leaders I was referring to before. And there's definitely needs that financial officer definitely needs to be brought into that process. And they're the ones that are going to say, when you have a requirement of, I don't know, $15 billion, and like what you actually, what's actually going to arrive is, 10 billion, that's the risk, right? So, what's at risk, based on that. And the CFO can definitely help you navigate those waters.
So, Mr. Weniger?
I do.
So, Nick, will you send Russ a note to see if he'd be willing to join us in the overtime session and have a little bit of a conversation?
Sure, Mike. And you want me to say a few?
Yeah, why don't you? So Russ, why don't you send a chat and say if you're dressed and willing to? He says he's glad to. So go ahead and wind up the program, Nick, and then we'll bring in Russ for a little bit of a impromptu conversation.
All right, will do. So I just wanted to thank again our patron sponsors, ABS Quality Evaluations and ABS Group and Onuma System, and mention that you can find more about these great organizations at these links below. And then thank our organizational members, and LCE, Lifecycle Engineering, is sponsoring this month of this programming, ALN Thursday at 4. So thank you to our organizational members for making this possible, especially LCE. And then next Thursday at 4, we have Robert Kaler. So we'd love to see you all right back here, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, July 8th. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Mike. And
okay, while you're bringing Russ on, something happened to my camera, but that's fine. While you're bringing Russ on.
It seems like he's here.
Okay. But before Russ starts, Art Kurland from University Health, one of our new members, said that the CFO is the one that validates that the activity was actually correct. So it plays an important role making things happen and then proving that the actions were valid actions. Hi, Russ.
Howdy. How you doing?
Very, very good. Good to see you. So what did you think about what Carrie is saying about the improvements to ISO 55001?
She's on target. The definitive logic helping her and the work that they're doing with the International Committee is on target with moving forward, focusing on looking at that strategic piece of it, and then how you find a way to implement the risk across an organization is critical. And they're addressing that. So that's awesome.
Excellent. So how have the two of you worked together in the past?
It's just been recent. Definitive Logic brought her on board with some work that we're doing to try to improve our asset management systems. It's been great having her around. It's always nice to see her face sitting there on the other side of the sessions, even though our networks are pretty terrible, so it makes it so we don't do video very often.
Yeah, I've gone through that too. So then Carrie, what have you said that Russ is definitely one of the thought leaders? What are some of the things you've learned from Russ?
Yeah, definitely. I think that you mentioned the strategic asset management plans. They're adapting that to to the Air Force, and so they're kind of working through what that looks like for their organization. What asset management plans look like for their organization, and then I think that the biggest thing is as they're developing some of those objectives, looking at the key piece is that risk piece, right? So they're going to be we're stepping through that as well. So it's definitely been a lot of fun kind of navigating and looking at their organizational structure and what that looks like today, and then where they want to head in the future.
The last time we were able to get together in person for our annual event at the National Academy of Sciences, actually 2 and 3 times before, the Air Force showed their Tableau approach.
Mm-hmm.
Really complex, accurate, thorough look at all of the Air Force projects, expenditures, and how they could be reconfigured in order to get different outcomes. Is any of that influencing the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in many ways, the Air Force are kind of ahead of the curve in looking at their asset management. So like I said, they're already kind of definitely on board with a lot of, like, I'll say at least the principles of, ISO 55000, and definitely those analytics help with, when you're looking at your KPIs or those key performance indicators in terms of, what the current condition is, what the value of that asset is to the mission, looking at kind of even forecasting, that analytical piece is critical to, to measuring, progress kind of along the way. So I think that's kind of where I see that fitting in.
Yeah, so what you said about the Air Force being ahead of the curve, yes, without a doubt. Having set up Tableau 3 years ago or more really shows them as leaders in this area. So Russ, how is it that you're able to improve when you're so far ahead?
So one of the things we're doing is we're going through and looking at the work that we've been doing for the last 12, 15 years and comparing that to the standard to say, what part of this building block that we've got in place does that standard apply to? And how well are we doing those things? And what we're finding out, or at least one of the big rocks that we found as a whole, is we don't do very well at translating objectives into action. So we're trying to figure out how to improve our processes to be able to do that. Objectives are a key part of a strategic asset management plan. We have a lot of difficulty in the organization coming to understanding and agreement on what an objective should be, how that works, because we have such a diverse customer base that we deal with. Between all the various missions that are out there on the Air Force, the 50,000 vertical assets that we have, it's difficult to balance across it. So we're all of those things playing into it. It's just a matter of figuring out how that all fits together. The standard helps us validate that our structure is correct, and it lets us find the holes for what needs to be put a finger in that dike and redesign some minor parts of the system.
Do you have an example that you can share with us that is publicly available? Nothing that you don't want to share?
Not really. What I will tell you though is that the Air Force about 2 or 3 years ago went through and set up a strategy document as a way to go advocate for resources. We sat there and said, if you want us to keep bases at this condition, we need this much money and we've got this shortfall. So we bring out that document every time we have to go ask for cash on a year. What that document does is set some very macro objectives in it. And we're having to extract those objectives and translate across these 50,000 assets and all the different customers that we've got. How does that apply to the people in the Pacific? How does it apply to the nuclear mission that we have? How does it apply to the fighter missions that we have? How does it all fit within that context? We can talk about it in generalities, but when it gets down to the specifics of our major stakeholders, it's hard to translate it to where they can understand it. And we have to clarify the keeping existing assets in good condition. That's one part of our business, but reshaping our assets and our infrastructure to address the changing Air Force mission is the second part of our business, and that's the more difficult to figure out how to address.
So Celia Mowat asks, how are you using technology to reach out to a diverse stakeholder group to get information from them? And then how are you giving information back to them? Is Tableau and other technology tools helping with that?
On the existing installed base that we have, the technology that we're using is Mission Dependency Index. We've characterized it as a tactical mission dependency index. It is not a computer part, although we're using it to document the process on the computer side. It is a change in how we look at our business. By using tactical MDI and that methodology, which is a system of what we use, we put the decision-making authority into the local installation commander's hand. By putting it in their hand, they're telling us what's important to them to be able, with a common basis of understanding of continuity of operations from their on-the-ground eyes. Again, with 78 major installations that are out there, it's hard to balance across it. So let's see what's important to them for continuity of operations. So if we're trying to figure out how to keep things in comparable condition across the Air Force, and we're trying to balance risk and requirements, that's our key factor to be able to sit there and say what's important to the Air Force and what's not. So that system is out there that has been the most valuable, and that's a change in the last 5 years.
So Carrie, I see what you're saying about Russ being a thought leader, and working with him must be quite enlightening.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Just point to the MDI again, where the Air Force is kind of leading the way. There's several other organizations that have that. Definitely, the Air Force has the most advanced MDI implementation, and has definitely made steps to, like you said, get the input from the mission tenants, across the installations, and then kind of help streamline and kind of that adjudication when the change request. So there's not just do it one time and it sits on a shelf. There's an active component of sustaining and making sure that we keep information current as well, because that's such a critical piece of the prioritization process.
Jim Dieter would like to know, Carrie, how does the Mission Dependency Index compare to criticality analysis?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, they're tied for sure. I think that, like I said, each organization kind of develops what they would say their mission dependency index, but I think there's definitely elements of like redundancy and replicability, interruptibility, those kind of things that kind of fit into the MDI scores. But ultimately, each organization has to tailor their MDI scores to, or their basically a value that articulates the value toward the organization's mission. So I think that's kind of where it kind of ties in.
And then Chris Golly, who is heading the U.S. Technical Advisory Group, is asking you, Carrie, how does your experience in government and military translate to the civil world and to ISO 55000, the civil world using ISO 55000?
Civilian world being like the federal clients, or do you mean like commercial?
Yeah,
Either
just
way,
that.
yeah.
Yes, everybody. Church,
Everybody.
church and state.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think if anyone, basically this ISO 55000 applies to anyone that has what I would say like a significant portfolio, right? So of assets. So, whether that's like commercial, whether that's civilian, and I know that you all have had guests on here from like airports, there's wastewater treatment. I mean, the ISO it has applicability across as long as you have like an asset portfolio. And so I think there's definitely principles that translate kind of across the board, not just the DoD realm. I think what makes DoD a little bit more complicated, I think, Russell, you mentioned this before, was that, they're geographically dispersed, across the world. There's a large number of assets kind of involved, and there's a lot of different missions. So, there's definitely agencies, State Department, there's other civilian agencies that have similar kinds of things, maybe not to scale, but similar kind of issues. But I think there's applicability for ISO 55000, across both, the commercial and federal clients.
I always say that ISO 55000 applies to people who have a significant portfolio. And when you're the volunteer mayor of a town that has a library, a post office, a fire station, a police station, that's significant to you.
Yeah.
So I think it really applies to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Russ, how are you feeling people are coming along at the Air Force in terms of accepting ISO 55000 more and more? Is it standard operating procedure yet, or are you still having to drive it home to people?
Well, I'll tell you that because we've been doing it for 15 years, it's standard operating procedure. They just don't know it's 55,000. So it's an education process, and that's going to take some time to raise their awareness to understand how it all fits.
Well, one of the significant differences in the ISO 55000 series of documents was it said that people using it do not need to be using it in order to get certification. All of the other ISO documents were for you to get certification. There was no reason for you to do them if you were not pursuing certification. That was the whole approach. And this is the first time it was put out there to say, these are good ideas, people should use them. And what I was saying earlier about how cross-referenced it is, it was confusing at first. Why are they keep asking the same questions? And in my approach to filling out sample one was, see what I already told you I was going to be doing about risk at this other place. It just kept referencing the other points where it was brought up first. I'm hoping that the rewrite consolidates things, keeps all the strength in it, actually makes it stronger by having it be shorter.
Yeah. I think that's the general consensus kind of across the board, is that they're going to relook, being more concise, in the document for sure, in the standards for sure.
Well, excellent. So, Carrie, thank you so much for taking on such a large international volunteer position to help improve this document. It's one of the few documents that I can think of where it has been universally accepted as positive. Nobody says ISO 55000 is bad. They might say, what I was saying, it's a little complicated or whatever. But everybody who uses it says you will benefit if you use it. Nobody has ever said it was a waste of my time.
Yeah.
So it's a really good document. And Russ, thank you for being an early and a strong advocate for its use. The Asset Leadership Network was really built on some of your case studies and enthusiastic support for it. You came out right away saying it's a good thing. And then 2020, we had over a dozen federal agencies saying, yeah, we're using it. We're on board. we're doing a strategic asset management plan. Previously, they said, yeah, we're looking at it. They're not going to commit, but last year they did commit. And we are hopeful that this year's annual event in November will also allow us to get together in person for at least one day at the National Academies in DC. And if it does, we look forward to seeing you there.
Hope to
Thank
make
you.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Russ, thanks for jumping on and giving us some additional insight. And Carrie, thank you so much for your time. And thanks to everyone who attended today. And happy 4th of July to all of us in the US. Those people who aren't in the US, have a nice weekend anyway, but our US viewers have a really good, safe time this weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you.